Hey everybody, welcome back. This week we're going to discuss the George Floyd protest and what it has to do with your psychology. Well, these George Floyd protests or riots, depending on how you see them, have been going on in America for a couple days now, and everybody has their commentary on it. Whether from the left or the right, the general thrust of the commentary is an analysis of society. What does this mean for society? Or politics or race relations, right? It's everything outside of us that people are analyzing. But I think the way more interesting analysis and way more helpful is, what does this have to do with your psychology? Or how are these protests, even if you're not involved, how are these a reflection of what is going on with us and what can we learn from them? So I have three thoughts here, three psychological takeaways from these protests. The first one is something that I discuss, somewhat often on this video or on the blog or on the podcast, is the fact that you can be right about a certain event, but that doesn't mean your emotional issues around that event are necessarily correct. So, the people just have the idea that when a client comes into therapy and they're complaining about something, what they're complaining about is probably wrong and it's just all some neurotic projection. But that's not really the case. The presenting problem, the initial thing that got them into the clinic, is probably correct. Let's say it's their mother-in-law. Their mother-in-law is crazy. Oh, it's causing all these problems. They're probably correct about the facts about their mother-in-law. But that doesn't make their emotional reaction to the mother-in-law correct. And if anything, their emotional reaction is some insight into what's going on with them and really has nothing to do with the mother-in-law, even though, right, they're correct about that one person. I think you see the same thing going on now. Like, clearly that this guy, George Floyd, was murdered. People are correct about that. What you do is you assume that your resentment and all the issues and all the feelings that you get, however justified they may be, you think those are correct and in correct proportion to the event. But that's just not the case. Oftentimes that is a distraction from your own issue and what's really going on with you. We see this all the time. Guys complain about their ex-girlfriend. Oh, she's so crazy. Yeah, maybe she was, and maybe you're correct about how crazy she was. But right now you have an emotional issue about that event that, again, I'm assuming you're correct about. Now let's delve into that. Let's figure out what's going on there. And that's where the real insight is in therapy. You see this in Feminists versus MGTOW, right? They're always complaining about somebody of the opposite says, oh, feminists are so crazy. Oh, the guys are losers. Their complaints are usually correct. No matter what no matter what you think, you have to agree that some of their complaints are actually valid. But that doesn't mean you build this lifestyle around this resentment. The resentment is there for you to manage, not to project out and create this like religious view of the world based on it. The second psychological takeaway is people are on Twitter and the news now saying, oh, how could somebody protest like this? How could people riot like this? What's going on with them? Oh, they must be insane. But I think emotionally, if you're getting distracted by Twitter or the news, Fox News, CNN, whatever, you are acting out in the same way that the protesters are. Emotionally, the same thing is happening. You're trying to distract yourself from your own issues by projecting it out onto society, right? The protesters say, society is inherently corrupt, so let's tear down society. People are saying, by going on Twitter, by getting glued to CNN, they're saying, oh, people are inherently crazy. My issues don't matter so much. I'm not saying, morally getting distracted by Twitter is the same thing as destroying private property. But emotionally, it is the same thing. And in order to understand where these protesters, these rioters are coming from, you have to at least understand to some degree how you do the same thing in a little bit different way, not as morally egregious, of course. I'm not equating it that way, but on some emotional level, it is the same thing. And the final point here is, look, we're pitted now in society with creating our own identity, yet nobody really knows what that means. Even maybe not even 100 years ago, you just did what your father did. We actually had last names based on what our family career was. Smith or Biermacher, right? But now we're put in this new society, this modernity, for better or worse, where you have tons of options, and people do not have the psychological resources to manage all those options. So what happens is they end up, freaking out. I mean, I think this is how you get like gangs, right? No father figure in the house. That's the one way that you can develop your own identity now, is to have a firm, in tune father figure. But not a lot of people have that. So you resort to gangs or tribalism, which is, gangs, or tyranny. You start openly to endorse tyranny because you're pitted now with being your own God, in a sense, creating your own identity. Yet, nobody shows you how, right? You learn, you go to a psychology class and they teach you about some experiments, but there's really no definitive instruction on how to create your own identity. So that's what we're seeing. And this is true for not only the protesters and rioters, of course, but all of us. How do we create our own identity? Well, that's what we do here at Animus Empire. We've developed a definite way to create your own psychological identity from which you can go on and manage the world, manage all these options, manage this thing we call modernity in a much more efficacious way. We do free consultations if you're not sure where to go or what to do. animusempire.com/schedule. Thank you. I'll leave it there. I'll have more to say about the protests, the riots this week on Animus Air. But until then, like and subscribe, tell a friend, and always remember that if you don't create your own identity, well, society will just do it for you.